Welcome, my name is Kara-Leah from the Yoga Lunchbox, and today I'm interviewing the founders of Evolation, Mark Drost and Zefea Samson. Welcome. Mark spent 6 years as the senior member of the Bikram training staff, and prior to his time with the Bikram organisation, he practiced and studied in the Yogananda lineage for over 20 years. So that's some serious yoga history there. Zefea has also got a long yoga history. She's been on the yoga path since the age of 5. And she competed in the top 10 at the International Yoga Asana Championships for 4 years. So they've created Evolation to provide, I like this, a comprehensive, inclusive and intimate training experience for students who wanted to study the Hot Yoga Primary Series without the associated attachments. So we'll come back to that. When they started doing this though, Bikram wasn't too happy, and he in 2011 sued Evolation Yoga and 2 other studios alleging copyright infringement. The other 2 studios ended up settling out of court, but Evolation insisted on seeing the court case through. So today we're going to talk about Bikram, but we're going to talk about the evolution of yoga, and we're going to talk about Evolation as well. And of course, Evolation teacher training. So welcome, Mark and Zefea. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having us.
So let's start sort of back at the beginning a little bit. Were both of you involved with Bikram, the Bikram community?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we both went to Bikram's teacher training. I went in 2002 and Zefea went in 2005.
Mm-hmm. And then
Mark, Mark spent longer and more time in the community than I did.
Yeah. So what was
that's where we met, in her training, so we have that to thank Bikram for.
Yes.
There's always things to thank Bikram for, isn't it? So what was it like being part of that community? How long? So you were there as senior teaching staff for 6 years?
Yes, I was. Well, I actually met Bikram before I went to the training, and then I was with him until 2008. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so from 2002 to 2008.
And what was it like?
And then Zefea actually went to, still attended another training in 2009 with, after she went to the training, then she went back and helped with the trainings as well. Mm-hmm. She just doesn't talk about it as much as I do.
So what was it like, Mark, when you were working with Bikram as a senior teacher trainer?
I love the experience. It was the energy was very powerful because the number of people and the type of people from all over the world and the different teachers we work with. I learned a lot in that training, just working at that scale. And the challenges were always around the personality of Bikram and not about the experience itself. But he's, in many ways, it was a wonderful experience, and the challenges, like I said, were more around the personality and watching the digression, I guess is the word, in how things were being run and what way or where it was headed, I guess is the way to put it.
So did you observe things getting worse in a way with the organisation and where it was going between 2002 and 2008?
Well, everybody has a story about spending time with the guru, whether it be Bikram or anyone else. You get close to the guru. As one of my friends says, you always get burned. You always get, there's always some kind of difficulty because it's a very powerful experience to be close to somebody who's teaching or operating at that level. As far as it changing, it changed a little bit. I think each year it progressively gets more difficult for the people involved because it gets more and more about the cult of personality and the cult of what's happening in the brand and less about yoga. He's a very good teacher that's obviously well accomplished and has done amazing things for the yoga world, but it just seems like each year it gets more wrapped up in the ego part of things and less about yoga. For me, like I started saying, everybody who's been close to him seems to have a story about how that trajectory, how that path has gone. And most know from the beginning that they're dealing with something that's completely different than they've ever dealt with before, and very difficult. Personalities very difficult. They stay because of the obvious benefits of the yoga practice and the people they get to work with. The community is incredible. I mean, there's so many great people, and that was always my point. I said, you have these amazing people around you. Let's let's work more with them and less against them. But back to the original point, I was one of the people, and there's few of them, who actually thought I could change things from the beginning, because I saw the dysfunction from the very first day. Mm-hmm. I thought I could, that was my own ego. I thought I could somehow change this force of nature known as Bikram. And, after a few years, it just seemed like this is never going to happen, and nor should it necessarily. I just found it a good time to go out on my own path. Mm-hmm. And with Zefea, it was perfect time, because we had, in our bond, in our relationship, we had a perfect opportunity to use our experience collectively to move it forward, to evolve what we had learned and take it forward.
Mm-hmm. I think there's different aspects. Like now, what Mark experienced much closer than I did. I wasn't close to Bikram at all in that sense. And I think there's people who see that all the things that are coming out now and are in publicity are really about his personality and his personal actions. For me, and I think for also many people involved or have been part of Bikram Yoga for a long time, it's not necessarily all, that's a big part of it, but for me it was also, and what we take to what we're doing now, it's the training, as Mark was saying, is a very impressive and incredible experience in many ways. Like he said, the amount of people, it's very intensive. I don't think there's any other yoga training that works that way. It's really kind of turns you inside out, and then you really revive and you come back to the surface in a very different way than you expect. But it's kind of like a training boot camp. And what there was a lot of things I felt, yoga boot camp, I felt a lot of things missing from the moment I stepped in there to the training. I did not know much about the man or the whole organization when I went to the teacher training. As I think many people, I had a lot of expectations of what a yoga teacher training should be that I was not getting there. There was nothing about yoga philosophy, nothing about yoga really, not about teaching yoga. It's very limited in many ways.
Limited is a good word. It's limited.
And also the community. We met amazing people, and I'm still in touch. Some of the people I met are really dear to me, and we're still in touch with, and are coming back to us. And those are connections that are, it's such an intensive experience, 9 weeks with this group of people, and the people that you meet later. But also by the time that we decided to move forward, I actually felt it's not really a community in the sense that you would expect from a community. There's a lot of people, because from the top,
there's a lot of fear.
It's fear-based.
Yeah. Well, it's become rigid and dogmatic and competitive. And
I think that could be very different in the yoga community. Mm-hmm. And so I think there were a lot of elements missing. And it took me personally a very long time to get used to that rigidity and to see some benefits of that and how Bikram rules his world and how, the ideas about how it works and also the philosophy behind how the yoga is carried on. It took me a very long time to get used to that, but then for some people it also takes very long to step away from that and to see that it is not the only way and that there are many different approaches possible.
And that's the best evidence that there's a challenge, that there's problems, is that it's so hard for people to pull themselves away. That's when we start viewing it as something cultish, because it's so overpowering. I mean, there's some obvious benefits, but it's really become something that's very much fear-based and control-based, and it just it becomes more and more that each year. Mm-hmm. And now it's obviously just gotten totally out of control. It's just, part of the issue is the size of it. It's just too big. Mm-hmm. It's way too big. Anything that big gets problematic pretty quick, and especially when you have some abusive behavior from the person who's running the whole thing, because that trickles down, of course. Mm.
So were you surprised then when the allegations came out last year? 5 separate women have come forward and filed civil suits alleging, amongst other things, rape. Were you surprised that that happened then, given your experience with the Bikram community over that 6 years?
No, I was surprised it took so long.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you see when you're as close as we were, I was specifically, in that world, as close to him as I was, it's very hard to see how it took so long. And even it's interesting that it's taking so long, even in this process, because he's crossed that line so many times. I mean, it's not like we can say that I have evidence that I was in the room when he was, raping or sexually harassing somebody. But we certainly saw enough to see that he crossed the line all the time. And I had several conversations personally with him that he would be dealing with that. Especially, excuse me, when he started suing everybody. I was one of the few people saying you shouldn't sue anybody. You should concern yourself with yourself, because you're going to find yourself on the other end of those suits very soon, because you constantly break the law and cross the line into things that are not acceptable in our culture. They may be acceptable in your culture, but they're not here. So I guess that's the answer, is that we're just surprised it took so long. I was trying to change within, because I saw not only dysfunction, but I saw collapse coming because of behavior, and some of it that passes on to some of the other people too.
So you actually gave him direct feedback that said some of the behavior I'm seeing is not appropriate and you need to sort it out.
Absolutely.
And yet this is what I always wondered, if there's a culture where there's some inappropriate behaviour going on, how is the inner circle as such responding to that, and is there any response? So were there people giving him feedback that he was not obviously taking on board? Very, very,
excuse me, very few people in that world are willing to say anything to him, and even if they are, it's not, it's never taken as...
It's the people who leave.
Yeah, the people that leave are the ones that, I mean, eventually you leave. And, a few people are saying, hey, you should change. But, his answer is always, don't try to change me. Everything's fine. I'm doing just fine, and what I do is successful, and don't worry about me. And so, well, I am concerned about you because you're my friend and you're my teacher, and, you're, we love you and you're messing up.
Yeah.
You're messing up in a big way. And that's a tough position to be in, because we're the student, You're the guru, you're the teacher, but it's been out of control for a long time. You can talk to people that have known him for 20 years longer than us, and it's been a progression.
Yeah, there's an irony there, because yoga in essence is a process of self-inquiry, isn't it? It's looking into oneself and seeing the shadow. Yes. And here's someone who's been teaching yoga for a long time, who's a big, he teaches so many teachers, and yet it doesn't sound like he had any kind of self-inquiry process going on.
Well, it's the biggest challenge of anyone who teaches, and especially teaches yoga. And you see this not just in Bikram, you see this throughout the yoga world.
Yeah.
See people that, or even throughout the, the larger world community. As soon as you become encased in this little box and you just focus on your own story, and even if it's the subject of yoga, which is about self-inquiry, eventually you lose touch with that reality, because it's just all about something external. So yeah, you forget about that internal focus. And I think anytime you do it at the scale that he has, it's, that power is going to corrupt you. We do this in our own teacher trainings. We talk about it right from the beginning, that even as someone who's just starting out as a teacher trainee, you have to be careful of what this power is when you become a teacher, because you can very easily go to your head, very easily. I mean, we now live in a world where, Bikram is not the only yoga celebrity. They're popping up everywhere. The idea that yoga and celebrity is really concerning, let's put it that way. So because we're putting the teacher on the pedestal, and that's not where the teacher needs to be. And I mean, the good news is that yoga is evolving, and what we're experiencing is this massive shift from this age-old, top-down, guru-dominated culture into this collective culture of many more women, and really strong female voices, and more of a collective approach. And so there's some big advantages to what this shift is. Bikram is just, I think, the last of a long line of male dominating figures in this world of yoga. So we live in very interesting times, let's put it that way.
So as teachers of teachers yourselves, what processes do you have in place then to make sure you don't fall into that same trap of getting stuck in that box?
Good question. That's one for you.
Well, one of the things
that's Zefea's job to make sure of that. She checks my ego all the time. See, hold on one second. That's one thing Bikram doesn't have, because he dominates that relationship with his wife is incredible. His wife is a perfect balance for him, but he just stopped letting that happen. That's all. I mean, he really each day pushes her further and further away from creating any balance in that world. So Zefea is that balance, that equal balance in our world. The male ego will swallow itself if you allow it to.
Is that what you experienced, Zefea?
Well, one of the things we said to each other from the beginning and when we started Evolation is that it's not about us or not about the people specifically. It can be about the people as a collective. We really like to talk about Evolation as a collective. I like to explain our logo as such. It's you have all these dots around in the middle space, and if you haven't seen it, just have a look. In the middle space is white, is empty, and that for me is represents all the infinite possibilities that we can, as a collective, achieve. And all the dots around it, they all have different colors. Some are closer to the middle, some are further outside, but all these people together are forming what Evolation is. And so we're also just one of the dots. And we might be closer to the center right now, but that's also constantly changing.
But we're not the dot.
We're not the dot.
We're not the center.
And we view everybody who comes in, trainees, give us input and help change the course of where we're going, as well as teachers, very experienced teachers, newer teachers. We hope that everybody can find a place to collectively determine where we should go. And because we've started this and we have some thoughts and there has to be some guidance, of course, we have a little bit more to say in this organization at this point, but we really hope that the longer this progresses and the longer it continues, the more it really will be a collective where everybody has something valuable to share.
We just set it up that way from the beginning. That's the simple thing, and that's what Zefea is so good at keeping in, because it's easy for it to go become more of an individualized thing or more about a particular idea or personality. And it is, if from the beginning, which we did, we set it up that way to be inclusive. It's not just the trainings, but everything we do is inclusive. Including Bikram and people from the Bikram world. Is the only thing you need to do is step away from this singular idea of the way things should be and contribute, in a more open way, a more conscious way, and you'll be a great part of not just of Evolation, but the yoga community as a whole. As I was saying before, is already developing that way. So we're simply mirroring that, and we just put systems in place to protect it from becoming something about one particular idea or one particular person or ego.
And it's very little things that are maybe not earth-shattering, but I think that are contributing to that. And that's that in the training itself, from the beginning, we view our trainees as teachers with that same responsibility as the trainers in the training towards each other, to help each other, but also for us, constant feedback is very important. And when
versus no feedback.
Versus no feedback, or what we're really used to it started Bikram, but a lot of studios, when you in Bikram studios where you start to teach and you have questions like, I see this in class, but I'm supposed to say that. Can you tell me why? Well, just because I say so is always the answer, or just because it's in the dialogue. And that's things that we, from the beginning, start talking about. It's there's not just one way. We like to hear what you have to say, and then we bring in why we think it's the way it is right now. But that can change. It doesn't mean it's written in stone. But the feedback, and if you as a more experienced teacher cannot take the comments or the feedback that brand new teachers have to tell you, then you really are in a place, maybe you shouldn't teach then. Like you're saying, it's self-inquiry, and if you don't know how to do it yourself, you need to seek out for other people to help you on that path and help you grow. So if you cannot acknowledge the teacher that are other people, that everybody you encounter is for you, then I think you're stuck in your teaching path.
Mm-hmm.
So we just think that's necessary to go forward as a teacher. Yeah. Back to my interaction with Bikram, the only reason I could stay as long as I did is because he would actually listen to feedback once, and not because I'm anything great or just once you have a connection with another teacher, and there's that back and forth, there's a feedback culture. I'm listening to you. I'm not just dominating this. And that's really the only reason I personally could stick around with him, is because there was at least some of that. He actually listened to some of the things I and some of the people around at the same time. He listened to some of the things we said, and he listened to the input. But then the realization comes that that's a very tiny piece of that reality, and it's just way, the 99% of that reality is not listening to anything or anybody. Mm-hmm. And I think the key to the balance of being a teacher is to, no matter how powerful or influential you are, is to always be in that space where you're listening to feedback and and ideas from all the people around you, mm-hmm. and you're always open to that.
So when you left in 2008 and created Evolation, you took the beginning Bikram Series, which is the 26 postures and the 2 pranayama, but you've evolved it, haven't you? So why did you stick with that series, and then how did you know how to evolve it? What gave you, how did you trust that what you were doing with it was taking it to a better place?
Well, first of all, it works. Second of all, it's how we were trained. We get that question, well, why don't you just do something completely different? Well, okay, well, that's like saying to Henry Ford, why don't you just start building spaceships instead of cars? Well, that's fine. It was what we knew. Mm-hmm. It works. It's the greatest doorway into a hatha yoga practice that we think we've ever seen, or that the world has ever seen. So there's a great amount of credit given to the people who have helped develop that, which, by the way, is not just Bikram. Mm. And it's a whole process of a lineage, and it's another example of it's not a single identity. So when we decided to evolve it, it was something very simple. This works. Let's just take some of the rigidity out of it. Let's take some of the demanding perspective, because it turns into this "you do it my way or else" kind of a behavior, and start sprinkling in a little bit of other things from the wider spectrum of what yoga is. A little bit more focus on meditation, on stillness, on breathing, all the things that make hatha yoga just one part of a much larger whole of what yoga is. Mm-hmm. So it was just a very simple step for us. And for many people, they'll take the class and say, well, I don't see a major difference. The major difference is in how it's presented. It's not just about the asanas or the heat or anything else. And the other idea is just to keep it open so a studio or a teacher or an individual can grow and evolve in their own way. The idea that you hold people down into doing one thing is completely opposite of what yoga teaches. So we were simply using Evolation was, let's take this foundation, learn from it, and then grow from it, and then allow everyone else who comes into it to grow from it, because it happens anyway. All the struggle you see in the Bikram world is people evolving and finding a ceiling and not being able to do anything. So eventually they break through it, or they stay stuck in it, or whatever happens. It's a natural thing for human beings to evolve and change. Mm-hmm.
So, some people say that, or find a little bit surprised that the changes have not been more drastic or faster too. We've been taking small steps in changing, and again, it's also because we really want it to be that collective approach. And there's a lot of things that really work in this series. As Mark was saying, is a great entry door into yoga, and people from all sorts of backgrounds and levels can practice it. There's also things that are obvious to many people what is maybe not perfect about it. Some postures are maybe not the best for beginners, or are more vulnerable in the series. And there's things missing also if you compare it to other types of practices. But then the ways you could change that are there's the tons of ways, unlimited ways that you could deal with that. And again, we don't really have an urge to make the evolution sequence or put our stamp on something and then call it our own, and by that basically doing the same thing, claim something that
we want to create another identity.
No, and I think what really the beauty is on that collective approach is that people with different backgrounds and different ideas of how it can evolve all have a place within Evolation. So some studio owners of our affiliate studios decide to take it one direction and some in a different direction, and some like to stick very close to what the original series is. And I really like that about that you have things that you recognize, there's a core about it, that it's the same, it's a familiarity, but that you can see as a student that it's not one way, and that you can different benefits by doing different variations of the same postures or a different order. And that's also, it makes it harder for us also to teach our teacher trainings like that, because we're open to students from different types of studios that will teach whatever their studio is teaching around the same core.
Our people coming through our training are teaching many different sequences, similar, not so similar, totally different, and we just see ourselves as a group that helps start with the foundation, very much influenced by Bikram, because that's his idea, is like give something very basic. The only difference, the main difference, not the only, is that we don't close the door on you once we give you those basics. We believe in giving you the same basics, but giving you a little more, and quite frankly, we can do that because the scale is much smaller. It's more intimate, more hands-on. I mean, you get way more in 250 hours than you would in 1,000 hours the other way, because there's only 25 people at the most there. And, you know, it's hands-on, but it's, like Zefea was saying, I mean, anybody can come through that training and then go and do what they want. And then our affiliations, you know, we're working with people that are developing their own series. Like Michelle Pernetta in London, who just started Fierce Grace. Wonderful woman's been teaching for 30 years and has a solid grasp on some new series that she's teaching, one that's based on the Bikram, others that aren't. And we can affiliate with someone like that, work with someone like that, support someone like that, doing the foundation work that we do, and not in any way being at odds with someone like that, because they're doing their own thing. I mean, what Evolation is a support system for teachers and studios, whether they want to stay with something close to what Bikram has, you know, popularized, or whether they're doing something completely different.
Yeah, I say that makes sense. Like you say, you're holding that core, teaching that core, but allowing people to evolve and take it where they need to, depending on where they're at. So when you first started doing this in 2008, and then in 2011, Bikram sued you, basically said you're infringing copyright because you're teaching my sequence. Were you surprised that he sued you, or you kind of expecting that it would come? Because you must have known, right?
I think it was both.
It was both, because on one hand, it was like, he wouldn't be that crazy, because I know all the ins and outs. I know the law. I know all the, excuse me, but all the BS that he put out there about the sequence and its copyright. And I know that it's all smoke and mirrors, and I was on the inside, so very surprised from that perspective, because it's very brazen to sue the person that knows everything about you. But at the other,
because you had still been in touch. With
I had still been in touch. I mean, this wasn't like I wasn't angrily leaving the Bikram world.
Yeah.
It was, I still talked to him. Of course, you know, as time, the reason why I wasn't surprised in a smaller sense is because the last few times I tried to reach him, he avoided me. You know, I even went to LA once. He said, "Yeah, come on over and see me." I got there and they said he was gone. That kind of thing. Yeah, right. So it was, you know, it was, in that respect, it was okay now, you know, because I was trying to reach him and say, "Look, I want to show you what I'm doing, and, you know, and how you've helped, and, you know, show you where we're taking this." And then there wasn't much communication, and then 6 or 7 months later we got the lawsuit. The thing that surprised me was just how much vitriol there was, how much just straight out lies and accusations that were way beyond what I would imagine. Even though I've seen him behave that way towards people, it really reached a peak level pointed at us. So, yeah, I mean, it took us back in just, because it wasn't just about the sequence. It was a chance for them in a civil case to just say and do whatever you want and then put it out there publicly. It was a personal, emotional attack. So it was, excuse me, a little surprising in that respect.
Yeah. So the other two studios that he sued, they settled out of court with him in November of 2012, was it?
Yes.
But you didn't. You chose not to settle. Was that a difficult decision to make, or did you just know that he didn't have a leg to stand on and you wanted to take it all away? Well,
we knew from the beginning it was the right thing to do. That's what you teach people in yoga. You teach people to focus on the higher good. It starts with your own self and your own self-awareness. And we just made a decision, Zefea and I, early on, that we were not going to just let it go away.
So when you say it was the right thing to do, what do you mean by it was the right thing to
the right thing to do for the yoga community, the right thing to do for him. If you're serving everybody, we still see ourselves as serving our teacher. As crazy as that may sound to people, I still have his best interest in mind. I really think he needs to just stop, wake up, just what we teach everybody, look inside. And I thought from the beginning that if we carry this all the way through, it's going to serve him, it's going to serve the wider community, it's certainly going to serve us, even though it's going to be the most difficult thing, because when you go up against that kind of money and power and just outright crazy lies, that you're going to have a difficult time. But we just, from the beginning is the answer, we decided to do that. And we could have even taken it further. We didn't take it to trial, and we still had to make that decision in the end. But we certainly didn't settle it and say, oh, yeah, let's just go away. We took it to what we knew would be the most important issue, which was the sequence and its ability to be copyrighted, which has never been true. It's never been copyrighted. And it's very plain in U.S. law, copyright law, that you cannot copyright a yoga sequence.
Yeah.
So that was, underneath it all, even though there was all this other stuff. And that's what he does. That's what he's always done. He makes it so big and so so over the top that it makes people want to settle because they get disgusted with it. Matter of fact, the other people you mentioned, they settled recently, or just before we got the summary judgment, because they were so disgusted with it. They just couldn't believe that he would stoop to those levels to make his point, or to continue the smoke screen of making the whole world believe. And this is where the fear thing comes in. He's just got the whole world. First of all, the whole world thinks he has a franchise. He doesn't. Believe it or not, because it takes a lot to register in all these places. He does not have a recognized franchise in most states and almost all countries. He does not own a sequence. He does not own a copyright on the sequence. He owns a copyright on his book. But there's all this attempt to put fear out there, so, and that's why there's the constant lawsuits against people. And I watched him do that to people. I watched him claim victory with open source when he didn't win. It was just, it just gets to a point where we just had to say we're going to see this through. Now he's appealing that decision, but, it's very clear in the law that you can't copyright this a yoga sequence. So I think that benefits the wider yoga world immensely. I think people are already experiencing the benefits of that clarity, that weight being lifted off of them.
In a way, it was what was interesting and difficult, I think, for us, but we talked earlier about how to constantly stay in check and do that self-inquiry. That was definitely something we had to constantly do in this process, because basically you have two choices when something comes at you like that. You fight, or you run, or you surrender. And being in the fighting mode, it's really easy to... We got so many messages from people when we first broke with Bikram and started Evolation, but also once it was public that he sued us. So many people came to us yes, let's fight him, but in really in the nasty way, calling names and whatnot. And
we still get that. Everybody wants to fight him.
Put in the public, and we have never had the urge to do that. we think he's doing a good enough job, digging his own grave in that sense with his own behavior. We're like, let's just focus on what we think is right. But it's hard when you're put in a position like that, when you have lies and slander.
It costs a lot of money,
It costs a lot of money. And so we had to constantly check back with us, like, yeah, what is the right thing to do? We know that we're in our right, and how can we stick to that without going to the other, too much to the other side in the like, yeah, yes, let's totally trash the other party, because that's just not a place where we want to be. And I think the other people that, you know, are kind of surrender to that feeling like, oh, you or have to be in that place where you fully fight and
surrender. Use the word. You said we surrendered. We surrendered to it, and we looked at it from a collective approach. There was all this support we had from all over the world. We had incredible lawyers that were willing to go way beyond. You know, because we don't have the financial ability to just take on somebody at that level. But if you surrender to it like we did, I guess that is the simple answer. You know, it's always about, for us, it's always about trying to do our best to stay within what it is that we teach. You know, if we teach something, we should certainly try to do our best to live it. And
so in a way, the court case became your yoga at the time.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was one of the more difficult challenges, because it's, no matter how much you practice and teach this to be, or no matter how much you expect it or don't, it's still a massive, massive thing to deal with. And, you know, there's nothing against the people that settle, because in their own way, you know, they did their practice too. It was just a decision we made that it was not for us, because for us to have clarity, and I really still see it as a way to serve him.
Yeah.
You know, I would do anything for him to wake up and see how he's helped change the yoga world, millions of people, and, you know, and stop obsessing about everything else, and fear and the abuse, and all those things come from someone who's become a very lonely person. And, you know, we still see it as we still see him in that community as a group of people that we want to serve. And that's how we see Evolation, is just, you know, a path to heal. That was one of the original concepts behind Evolation, was to evolve. Evolation, elation, you know, the elevation. There was a lot of words, a lot of ideas that came together. And part of it was to heal the lineage, the community of, you know, Yogananda's lineage.
So that court case kind of cleared the way so that you knew that you could teach what you're teaching. Now, I had a look on your website and counted up. You're doing 17 different teacher trainings this year alone, and you're doing them in Europe and South America and North America and the Middle East and even in Africa. That's a huge schedule. And is that the two of you going around and doing all those, or you've got a bigger crew of people that are working with you?
Yeah, we're developing a very strong collective of experienced senior teachers from different traditions who are coming together to spread these teacher trainings. Because for us, the demand is there. People want us to be there. It's a way for us to show that it isn't about us. I mean, we're going to be in as many places as we possibly can, and we're working on being in 2 or 3 months. You know, that's our new yoga power we're trying to develop. But part of it is I'm a little bit crazy. You know, I'm a little bit of an adventurer and very ambitious, and I think big, and which is why I got along with Bikram, obviously. So, and my wife, again, is the balance to that. She loves to travel. We love to be in these different places and teach yoga, and it's really what makes us happy. But we also have 2 young children, and we have to keep it in balance. But we think the time is to go out to the people of the world and teach them there. That's the other thing about being accessible, you know. A lot of people can't fly across the world to go do a teacher training. So everything about what we do is to be accessible to people that want to be yoga teachers.
And again, also, it's again a collective approach to training. It's a small but really good group of trainers, and I'm really excited about this coming year. The trainings are going to be really, really nice locations, but also the trainers. Everybody, many but not all of them, were at some point Bikram trained, but have had many different other experiences in their life that they bring and they have to share. So every training, none of our training is going to be exactly the same because it depends on the group of students that are there, depends on
very organic
on the trainers and what they bring in their personal experience and knowledge, and that's really exciting.
So aside from obviously teaching asana and the trainings, what else do you think are the most important things about teaching a would-be teacher? What are you really teaching a teacher to do? Like
to live.
We start our training. That's really my thing. That's one of my most exciting moments in the training is on the first day. And I ask people a very simple question before we introduce ourselves to each other to write down who you are. And we come back to that question throughout the course of the training. And it's so amazing to see how that constantly changes throughout the training. And the answers that they give at the end are completely different than the long stories that, the stories that we tell, the layers that we think of who we are, and how that kind of dissolves in the training. And some people describe it as more as a life training. Like Mark was saying, we
self-discovery.
Yes, you get the tools on how to teach and use your voice and your body language and your language. And but I think it's just the time that you spend. Not many people spend that kind of quality time with themselves and with other people.
Our perspective is that in order for you to teach, you have to be on a path to self-realization, or at least self-inquiry, self-awareness yourself, and that's where it starts from the first day. It's so much more about that than what sequence you're teaching or anything else. Those are tools for people to then go share that with the rest of the world or with students. That's what's most exciting to us is you teach a yoga class, but you can then teach someone to teach, and it's just a larger impact. And that's what inspires us. So it's a life training.
We don't think we have all the answers to all yoga questions, and there's obviously more people that have much more long time yoga experience or have explored it in a very different way than we did. But I see our role mainly as guiding that process. Like you have this onion and peeling the outer layers off, and to kind of declutter our mind. And a lot of the stuff of the Yoga Sutras, when you read that, like the questions, and not that we have the answers, but when you collectively again approach that, and we just see ourselves as a guide in that process, and we see ourselves as students in that process as well, because every training we do, we learn so much more from the people that are there.
Everybody's a student and everybody's a teacher. Yeah, and Yogananda is really ultimately where this all came from. Yogananda's influence in the yoga world. For me personally, one of the biggest questions I had when I first went to Bikram's training was, how come we don't talk about Yogananda? It's like, you come from this incredible lineage, and it's, and that's, so we're coming full circle to try to bring that back, or those teachings, which is just, the wider spectrum of what yoga is. It's not just, again, it's not about that specific guru, but it's the teachers that are trying to come with the whole yoga world, which is not easy to do, because people want, they want to know how to stand correctly, or, there's a lot of brilliance in the very simple way of teaching a sequence a certain way, but it's only the beginning. And that's the important thing. It's only the beginning. And whoever's interested in knowing more and experiencing more, which most students are, even after just a few weeks, the majority of studio owners and teachers will tell you that if someone practices regularly for a few weeks in a hatha yoga or even a meditation class, their world expands exponentially. And they want to know more and they want to experience more. So the training or the classes that we teach simply provide that. Let's give you a little bit more.
We give a little bit of, just as a little peek into other doorways that are there. Some other classes, vinyasa classes, yin classes, meditation, and all these things in itself require at least a whole other different training by itself, but just the fact that people can taste a little bit of that and know that there's so much more out there. And yes, it's important to focus on this strong foundation so that you are strong enough to go then and explore further. Because the subject of yoga is so vast. Just the idea that you can know that after 200, 500, whatever hours is, of course, is silly.
We view ourselves as seed planters.
Yes.
Because in 250 hours, you can only do so much.
Yeah.
You can come out and teach a basic class, you can know a little, but if you plant maybe 100 other little seeds of this wide view of what yoga, the art and science of yoga is, then those will germinate and grow over time as the teacher continues on their path of teaching and, you know, and being the student.
When our students after trainings come back to us, sometimes a few weeks, sometimes months, or even years, sometimes we don't hear from them from a year, and then all of a sudden we hear the stories back of
Great story.
sometimes, great stories of their experiences, but sometimes with questions about just the things that are going on in the classroom, but also sometimes asking for more literature, or sometimes they tell us that they moved on and went to a completely different training and they don't teach this anymore. But in either case, I always have the feeling like, yes, we did our job. Because they got excited, they embraced yoga, and they made it part of their lives and carry on, and they found their own way to bring that to more people in the world, and I think that's all we can ask for. And it's really exciting to see that.
Yeah, I can see how excited both of you are. That you really embody what you're saying, which is it's amazing to see.
Well, so blessed. We're so blessed to be able to live this life.
Yes, it's the best thing. I don't want to make this an advertisement, but you know, going to a yoga, of course, we would love to see all the viewers in our teacher trainings, but any teacher training will change your life. Even the ones that are, you know, as crazy as
even the boot camps.
what we had for our training. I would probably not choose for that again, or would not necessarily recommend it to anybody because of all the other stuff around, but it still did change my life, and it's, you know, the reason why we are sitting here right now and we do what we do.
That training will change again.
It will change again.
Everything evolves.
And I just truly think that embracing yoga in your life, it's because of the life changes it makes. It's the best thing you can do for yourself and for everybody around you.
And no matter what we've said here, everything is perfect just as the way it is.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me and to the Yoga Lunchbox viewers. It's been a pleasure to meet you both, Zefea and Mark, of Evolation Yoga.
Thank you.
Thank you. Namaste.